Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Page Turners Plus. As always, we thank you for joining us and for following us on Facebook, Page Turners Plus, as well as on YouTube. And today we'll be reviewing Elizabeth Acevedo's Clap When You Land. Before we do that, however, we must pay our respects to George Lamin, uh, Caribbean literary giant who died over the weekend of June 3rd, 2022. To tell you a bit more about our book that we're discussing today, we have Eric. Eric?
Thank you, Rajay, and hello and good day to everyone. Clap When You Land is Elizabeth Acevedo's third novel in verse, or third novel, um, and it follows her National Book Award winning Poet X and With the Fire on High. Elizabeth Acevedo is a Dominican American writer and former national slam poetry champion. And this particular novel in verse centers on the stories of two sisters, one Dominican American and one Dominican, who never knew each other until the tragic death of their father on a plane crash. So, in the aftermath of the plane crash, secrets about their father come out, which makes the story a unique one.
Thank you, Eric. And as you mentioned, that the book is written in verse, so I think that's probably a good way to start in terms of the structure of the book. So, given that it was written in verse in a poetic format, do you think this added to the depth of the story? Did it help with reading? For me, definitely, it was a light read just because of that. So I went through 400 pages quite easily. Just to throw it out to you, Eric, do you think that that added to the depth of the story?
For me, yes, definitely. It wasn't the first novel in verse that I've read, and I was hesitant years ago when I first read novels in verse. But I like the format. It's easy to read. It's quick, but at the same time, at least with Acevedo's two novels in verse, she adds some complexity and a lot of depth to the characters, and I think the format enables the reader to feel what the individual characters are saying or what the narrator is describing.
Anyone else would like to jump in there on the structure and format of the book?
Yeah, I want to agree with that. I felt that the fact that it was written in verse, like Eric said, you really feel all the emotions of the narrators, and it also gave her an opportunity to use a lot of really beautiful language, which in a book written in prose might seem like a bit much, but because this was written in poetry format, her use of so many different metaphors, I think, just made it just an absolutely beautiful read, and it was also a really quick read as well.
I found it very lyrical, and I don't know if that had to do with the fact that it was written in verse. It was almost rhythmic, to be honest. um, and I felt that it helped to add to the depth of the book. Poetry gives well written poetry that it gives a topic much more meaning. As Francine said, the metaphors are thick and fast, and so I felt all about that with the way the book was written.
Kasua?
Yeah, I'm not one to read a novel in verse, if I'm honest. So I'm delighted that I actually enjoyed this one. I really thought it was beautiful. I'm not going to say everything that everyone else said, but I completely agree. It was an easy read. I think it's a very absorbing story already. And the poetry really kind of just draws you right into, like Francine said, the characters' emotions, the interiority that they experience, as well as the whole, drama of the story itself. It was a wonderful book. I enjoyed it.
I'm not sure if you have anything to add there in terms of the structure of the book, Paula. But if you do, now is your chance.
You're right. I don't have anything to add.
And that's what makes this show great because we all see what each other is thinking. So, in terms of the relationships in the book, I guess we could turn now to some of the relationships in the book. We have a lot of strong trust in female relations between Yaira, Dre, Camino, and her aunt, Camino and Carlene. So, do you think that the novel is about sisterhood as much as it is about grief and loss, etc.? I'm throwing this out to anybody.
Yeah, there was definitely a strong sisterhood theme um, there, and power, women's power was an important theme, despite the fact that there was this central conflict which has you questioning the choices women make. But they make their choices and they live with them, which is the best any of us can do. So yes, and there was a lot of supportiveness. I'm not sure that the kind of supportiveness we saw in the novel would necessarily happen in real life. I imagine it can happen in real life, but I don't know if it happens often in real life. Certainly the way the conflict resolved itself towards the end, I've seen it happen, but it's rare. But I imagine that when it does happen, we should celebrate it.
But let me ask a question. As we're speaking about the conflict, is the conflict a typical type of conflict situation that you find in the the Caribbean blend of human relations? Is it typical? And are they, if it is it that they're typically resolved in this sort of fairy tale way? That's the question I want to throw out.
I can jump in here. I think I don't think it's that uncommon a situation, actually, is probably what I would say. I don't know if I'd describe it as typical, but I don't think it's super rare and that could never happen. I know in my own family, we have a very similar story to what the girls experienced when they discovered each other at, it wasn't thankfully the death of the father, but it was certainly a family occasion. It was revealed that ... And so I don't think the ending is necessarily a fairy tale ending so much as a hopeful one. Paul has talked about the power of sisterhood and the bonds of sisterhood. And I think that's kind of a running theme through the novel, but it also points to the hope that can come out of grief. And what was the tragedy also, this isn't a spoiler to say, what was a tragedy still opens the way for light to pass, if that makes sense, because of the way the resolution happens. I think you could construe it as a fairy tale, but I also think it offers another way of dealing with a very difficult situation that a lot of families have to deal with. It's probably how I would say it.
And Tony, sorry, go ahead, Eric. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I think we also have to remember the audience, and I mean this is a young adult novel in verse, and I mean this is going out for a key audience of kids between 13 and 17 years old. Obviously, we're all adults here, and we've read it. So the audience is broader, but the niche audience is 13 to 17, and so we're talking about the way. Well, Tony raised a question about the way the conflict was resolved, and I think that for Acevedo, in all of her writings, the end of her books always end on hope, and they're aspirational, but they're also inspirational. So I think we have to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say about the ending as well. That when you think about who it's targeted to and the fact that, I mean, you want to give teenagers hope, right? You don't want them to already think, oh, my life is going to be this horrible, traumatic thing already at 17 years old. So yes, I think the fact that it ended with hope, which is not to say that it's a happy ever after perfect ending. They're gonna have I mean, we're talking 17 years of issues that they're gonna need to deal with going forward, right? But there is hope, definitely.
I didn't find that the sisters bonding was particularly surprising. That happens. That happens a lot more easily than the mother of, well, the wife of the husband bonding with the child that comes from a relationship which is not the marriage. Um, it happens. Tony and I actually know people here who, you know, the wife has resolved it herself to it and has not held it against the child because it's not the child's fault.
Yeah,
But
but Paula,
mhm.
I mean, yeah, I mean, yes, we know people, but I'm telling you, it's also in my family. Generations or a generation removed from myself, right? Where like my great grandfather had a string load of children with his wife, but in between that there were some indiscretions, you know, let's call it that. But his wife took them in, believe it or not, as and in some cases those children felt more bonded to their stepmom, if you want to call it that, than her actual children. So it's something that I can't explain.
And I think too, in this situation, of course, we're talking about a child who's now fully an orphan. And also remember that her mother was, I mean, they were friends, the two women. And I think that probably had a lot to do with it. I mean, it is, you know, you think, okay, she's wow, like would I ever, you know, would I do this? But I think at the end of the day, she knew, I mean, she knew how much he loved this girl and the hopes that he had for her. And now I guess she has the opportunity to help him achieve what he wanted for his daughter. I guess that's one way of looking at it.
Yeah, I definitely think you're right, Hansi. I think there's something convenient in the writing of that, right? That she's not some random outside child. Yeah, she's your now dead friend's remaining child who's an orphan. That child, you know, is to be in a precarious security situation, because of the way the story plays out. And so there's enough going on there that you could understand the decision to take that child in. You know, it would seem almost slightly inhumane if you didn't within the given context. It's not a living woman that's, you know, taking your man. You know, it's a dead woman, and the child is all that remains. So yeah, I also think though, given the very brief turnaround we've just done, that it's too common a situation for people not to have what's what I'm looking for, a certain amount of sympathy in the context. One thing the book did for me is it highlighted in ways that I feel a bit stupid that I hadn't realized previously, but it highlighted how lonely it might be to be an outside child and to only be a single outside child. And both of the girls were only children. So finding one another was actually a really important thing for both of them, because actually they discovered a sibling of obviously too close in age to be comfortable, and there were going to be issues, but actually to have a sister and a sibling is actually really special, and that was really nice and a bit of an awakening for me. I was like, oh yeah, it must have been quite lonely to be an only child and a sibling.
And that was the first moment I started to cry when Camino made a discovery, and she was like, oh, I have a sister, and she was like, no, there's some, you know, I'm, because before she was the only person I'm tied to blood is Tia Solano, and all of a sudden she's like, no, there's someone else that I'm tied to by blood. And then when Yahaira had basically the same response, oh my goodness, I have a sister, like goosebumps, tears, you know, the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah, what's crazy to me though is that they're like a few months apart. Is that correct? So basically, they're almost like twins, even though two different women carried the babies, but they're only a few months apart, and then they look so much alike. It's just the shade, the skin colors is different, and the hair's a little different, but they're almost twins. And they have this discovery 16, almost 17 years down the line. I mean, that is crazy. And I'm not
I
gonna get into any of my family business, right? but
I was just
they
about
got
to say.
yeah,
I,
they got
I
some crazy stuff like that in my mama's family,
I
and she
feel like
don't
a lot
even
of
know about it.
Caribbean people can
I
relate
think
to that.
all of us know that because I can tell you there's some crazy stuff like that in my family too.
Yep, a lot of us could relate to stories like that. But one sisterhood, one example of sisterhood that I wanted to focus on was um Camino and Carlene, because before I found out that, and I don't want to reveal too much, that Carlene was where she was from, I was pronouncing her name as Carlene. I was like, that doesn't sound very Spanish, to be honest. And then, so I found the book very political in that sense, because the book was published in 2020, and I think 3 years before that, the government of the Dominican Republic said that children of Haitian migrants who were born in the Dominican Republic can't get citizenship. So I found that to be a really political point that was made in the book by Elizabeth Acevedo. Any comments on that, or no one wants to
No,
get
she
into
hit that head
politics?
on.
Yeah, I
She,
really
mhm.
like how she wove in these things without like hitting you over the head with it, because you're just discovering it, as Camino is narrating the story. So she's just talking about her daily life. And so she talks about her friend Carlene, and then eventually you find out, more information about her. And I really like that she was able to put that in the book without like, hitting us over the head with it. I thought that was really excellent.
I thought it spoke
Yeah,
to the author's skill that she's able to include that storyline and, like you say, unravel it slowly, and the implications of that in their lives at major events was incredible. It was well done and so subtle, but so important to include that. And as it comes to sisterhood, I mean, what a great example.
yeah. I mean, I really love that angle of the story. As someone who is descended from Haitians, that's a line that's important to me, and that's a whole issue that's important to me. Uh, and I was having a conversation about this over the weekend with a friend of mine about how Acevedo deals with that in 2020 or 2019 when the book is being written versus is it Uli Alvarez and how the Garcia sisters lost their accent, which she deals with that issue of Haitians in the Dominican Republic and their situations and their class, um, and obviously race so subtly that you really have to pull teeth to understand what she's getting at. But Acevedo, I guess, a generation removed as a Dominican American writer, this is something that's important, and she's going to find a way to make mention of it. So I really appreciate that about this text.
Paula, anything to add there?
No, I'm just very pleased that she dealt with it, you know, front on. She made you realize how difficult the life of somebody of Haitian descent is in the Dominican Republic, so that you can't hide from the issue. And I think a lot of the problems we have is that we try to, I think there's a lot of trying to hide from the fact that this difficulty is happening in the Caribbean among Caribbean people. And one of the things I like too is that she dealt with the whole issue of shade and how that impacts the status of Haitians, and the the importance of shade even in within Dominican families, because Yaira's maternal family, who are fair-skinned Dominicans, call her ugly. Um, and that they dealt with that. I like the fact that she dealt with that head on.
Not only do they call her ugly, but they also, it's a big regret of her mother's that her husband embarrassed her because her family had always been against her marrying a darker skinned man, right? It's more than that. That's something else to say, but I completely forgot.
But there's also a bit of hair texture being played with as well, which is also another factor in how we're perceived and how we're classified, as it were. So those are common Caribbean things that we grapple with. Paula, you know my peeve with the whole idea of being groomed. What is the perception of being groomed, really? How does a child go to school properly groomed, hair wise? Is that what's the basis of that, But I don't want to derail this Acevedo's clap when you land discussion to go off on a tangent. So back to you, Roger.
And this would be a good time to take our reading from Clap in Your Land, which will be done by Lotia Rose. Stay tuned.
Good morning to everyone. My name is Lotte Rose, and I am a teacher by profession. I teach secondary school. I teach foreign languages. I am originally from Cuba, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines is my second home. I have been living here over 30 years, so some people will consider me more Vincentian than Cuba. I lived in Cuba 21 years, 29 years, and over 30 years. So um, I'm going to read for you an excerpt from Clap When You Land. It's a novel written by Dominican American writer and poet Elizabeth Acevedo. And it's a novel written in verses. So it reads like a poem. Mommy is a good woman. A good woman. Mommy is smart and shows up to school conferences. Mommy is a good woman. A good woman. She works hard and always makes dinner. Mommy is a good woman. A good woman. She never forgot to pick me up from school. Mommy is a good woman. A good woman. She sewed my sweaters when I pulled the button. Mommy is a good woman. A good woman. Mended the holes I tore in my new jeans. Mommy is a good woman. A good woman. She buys thoughtful presents and kisses loudly. Mommy is a good woman. A good woman. And I know I failed her. Mommy wanted a girl she could raise in her own image. And I came forth. A good girl. A good girl, but so much of me when I was younger seems crafted from my father's spit, as if he shone up a light on her womb and pressed a fingerprint onto my forehead, baptized me his alone. I have words that I have kept secret from mommy, words a better daughter would have said. I am my father's daughter, a bad daughter to a great woman. The thing I learned about my father is like a smudge on an old white dress. You hope if you don't look at it, if you don't rub your finger in the spot, then maybe it won't spread. Then maybe it will be unnoticed. But it's always there, a glaring fault. Papi had another wife. I found the marriage certificate. The date on the form was a few months after my parents' own marriage here in the States. And if to ensure that anyone who stumbled across this envelope got it right, there was also a small picture included. My father with a beautiful brown woman with long dark hair, both of them in all white, as she carried a bouquet smiling up into his face while he stared steadily and seriously at the camera. My father had another wife, and I know my mother would not have known, could not have been the type to stay while her husband strayed year after year after year. This other woman, the reason my father left me, left us, broke trust, ignored the family he left behind. And when he returned last summer, I didn't know how to look him in the face and pretend. So it was easier not to look at him at all. When the only words I owned were full of venom, it seemed better to stop speaking to this man since the only option was to poison us all.
Welcome back to Page Turners Plus discussion of Elizabeth Acevedo's Clap When You Land. Just before we took the reading, we were discussing sort of the migrant story in the Dominican Republic and how that affects a lot of people in the Caribbean. Another aspect of the migrant story, I guess, or migration story that was presented in the novel was Camino's sort of perception that if she moves to the U.S., um, plenty more opportunities will be presented to her, and that the grass is green on the other side. What do you make of that, if anything? Do you think that that's a common thing in the Caribbean, or common thing globally anyway, for people to think that the United States is the land of opportunity, land of the free? Um, I feel like Tony might want to jump in here. Eric, I see Eric.
Yeah, I mean, I should be the first one to jump in here because I'm actually living in this joint, um, involuntarily, as a descendant of people who were chained in the bottom of ships that landed here, and folk think that just because we had 8 years of Barack Obama that we should be satisfied in our place. Um, but that's another story. Yeah, definitely. There's this perception, and this is that's one thing I appreciate about not only this text, but also um, other texts that by Caribbean authors that talk about migration or immigration, whether it's to the United States or the UK. Is that, yeah, the perception that it's better um, in a country like the United States or the United Kingdom. And the reality that these writers bring out is that no, it is not better. There are things that you have to deal with that you may not have to deal with back home. Definitely race. I don't think Acevedo gets into that as much here because the story doesn't progress that far into the future. But still, yeah, Camino has this grandiose idea about life in the United States, but at least for her, it's about educational opportunity. Uh, Definitely educational opportunity, but her whole goal for her life is really steeped with the needs of the island, and also her apprenticeship. And I'm not spoiling anything really, but her apprenticeship with her auntie, with a tia. So that's all I'll say about that. If you want to come back to me, I can
But
say a whole lot more.
but Eric, I don't know that the novel necessarily tells us that life is not better in the United States. Camino is able to get the education that she gets because her father has left the Dominican Republic and lives and makes the Yankee money to send her to the fancy school so she can get the fancy education. Um, so I don't know that the story is telling us that life isn't better in the United States. It is certainly telling us that the pull of the island is very strong. And it's almost as if your soul resides in the island, even though your body resides in the United States. Because it's not just from her parents, it's not just her parents who are first, first generation Americans who feel tied to the Dominican Republic. Yaira also feels tied to the Dominican Republic. She speaks about it's almost an identity crisis. She speaks about feeling so Dominican and not never having been to the Dominican Republic and having been raised in this atmosphere, which is almost entirely Dominican, even though she's in a different country. So that is how I perceive it. That your soul remains in the Dominican Republic, even though your body is somewhere else. I don't know if anybody else
But
thought
then
about it that
you
way.
get sort of evidence of Yair also being somewhat jealous of Camino, because when I think it was Camino started speaking Spanish, and Yair was like, "Oh, my Spanish is not this good." And so even though Yair was living in the U.S., I feel like there was some sense of, I'd call it jealousy, of life in the Dominican Republic. That's just me.
No,
I
I think
wanna.
that's
Sorry, you go ahead, Kasua.
so. No, I thought that was really well done. The connection to the diaspora and the feeling of being somewhere that you've never been, being from somewhere that you've never been. I thought the author did that really well, but also pointed out how the two girls' lives were similar and different, right? So on the one hand, when when Camino's stressed, she can go to the beach. She can walk to the beach from her house and swim in the glorious ocean, right? That comes with its own dangers, but that's open to her. For Yahira, her relaxation is watching Netflix with her best friend, girlfriend, in her house, and her best friend finds peace in creating a garden for herself. Right, so their ways of relaxing are really different based on where they are. But in that moment of crisis, when they're both dealing with the loss of their father, and they want to connect to each other, they both have the same impulse to find each other through social media. Right, and that's really interesting. There are similarities, but there are real differences. And there's ways that they understand their lives that are similar because they're both from the Dominican Republic in one way or another, but they have very different lives in other ways. I thought it was really well done. I thought it was really well done the way they did the diaspora, and the tension between their relationship when one of them perceives the relationship to be one thing, one of them perceives to be quite different in the early stages based on their material needs, and how they understand what it means to be from Babylon. You know, like it's really, really interesting. Their relationship to money. Like I think as a Londoner of Caribbean heritage, I know that for me, I feel like I live in the belly of the beast, right? Whereas for my Caribbean cousins always perceive me as being suffering in the belly of the beast, or they think I'm living a life of luxury. Or I mean, at the same time, they're under no illusion. So actually, I wonder if one of the things that's really interesting about them is that in 2022 or 2020, Camilo still managed to have quite idealized ideas of what life would be like in the US. I thought that was quite interesting because I feel like a lot of our Caribbean family members know full well that like it's not all peaches and cream out here.
I think, Kesawa, that it's a typical thing. Certainly, I know that in families, siblings very often perceive the other sibling as the favorite. I think it's a typical thing to think somebody else has it better than you. And I think this novel dealt with that beautifully because each girl thought that the other had advantages that she was denied. And I think all of us have felt that. And it's probably never true when we feel that.
Yeah, Roger, if I may quickly, I think the whole thing of migration is going to be with us it has been with us for centuries. I mean, Eric will tell you that, migration was forced in the original sense. And since then,
and Eric would be right.
Yes, and since then we have remained like nomads. We are restless, and we're in this constant search for the ideal. On the one hand, we are chasing opportunities to feed ourselves, and on the other hand, we are looking for a peaceful island life kind of existence where we feel at one. So I don't know how all of that is going to be resolved. The jury is out on that one.
Can I add one thing to that? I think one of the things that having the storyline, particularly with Carlene, is it further complicates this idea of abroad as being better, right? Because Carlene's family have made that transition. And we don't know when they arrived because that, decree goes back to 1987. So they she could be generations of being Dominican. But I think for as much as Camino believes that elsewhere she'll have a better life, and there are real kind of material advantages to going abroad, we also see that she's in a privileged position in the Dominican Republic in relation to Carlene. And that, I think, is just very, very clever and very subtle, but very well done.
In relation to all her neighbors. Yeah, it's not just Carlene, it's all her neighbors. And she described having the best house in the neighborhood with the fence and everything. And she went to a private school, which in the Dominican Republic would be I think in the book it mentioned she went to school with diplomats' children and the children of the wealthy Dominicans. So she did have a privileged life, and the fact that she had a privileged life and she was still looking towards the United States for better says a lot.
Yeah, so that goes back to Paula's point. Thank you, Paula, for making that point. But yeah, as still with the money coming from Poppy, it wasn't as though Poppy fell into a whole lot of money. Poppy was a hustler. I mean, and not that he was breaking any laws, but the man was working hard. Again, we don't know all the backstory. Acevedo doesn't give us all the backstory about Poppy and his business dealings, but he was. I don't think he was. He definitely wasn't robbing Peter to pay Paul, but I think he was. He had some stuff going on that he was able to break off enough to protect Camino, uh, and also to pay for tuition, and also to make sure that they had certain amenities in their home. Um, and I think that's a different type of privilege than, let's say, the kids that Camino went to school with. Uh, but yeah, that is I think that's a central part of the immigration story, especially in the Western Hemisphere, remittances, and how folk will come across the border here and will work from a general American point of view, will work menial jobs, but the pay for the menial job offers so much benefit to the families back home, whether it's in El Salvador, Guatemala, the Dominican, Haiti, what have you. So and there's another layer too, another layer about neo-colonial relationships. United States has taken advantage of Caribbean countries, especially in the time of neoliberal economics, which is a big problem in and of itself, and such creates what we saw with Poppy and his relationship to the island and his relationship to his family. So I don't want to get too deep into that, but uh,
Another complication that's part of the immigrant story is the loss. You speak about the menial jobs and earning enough in the menial jobs to send back remittances. Loss of status is one of the consequences of moving to the United States or places like that, because Papi leaves the Dominican Republic an accountant, and he goes to the United States and he's a hustler. Um, Tio, his brother, is a lawyer in the Dominican Republic, and we assume that is he has less of a status in the United States. Mammy is university educated, and she's working in a salon or something like that. So, and that is a typical thing. I think we all know stories like that from the Caribbean, where you leave the Caribbean upper middle class and you go to the one of the metropolitan countries, and you certainly are not upper middle class there, but you're earning enough to send back to your family and help them. So it's it's a choice you make, and it comes with consequences.
Tony?
Yeah, no, I wanted to take a look at Pappy. There's something that Eric said that, and Paula reminded me he was an accountant. But I was wondering, in his hustling, if any of you thought that his relationship with the thug I call El Cero, paying him to protect her, is that an insight to what his hustle might have been? How did he? No, am I just being too fertile in my imagination here?
Yeah, I think I think you're going a bit. No, I think that the reality is that that was the only recourse that he had. Like, you couldn't go report him to the police, you know? I'm getting the feeling that the police either didn't care or probably involved in the same hustle with El Cerro. So the only recourse he had was to pay him to leave his daughter alone. I don't think it was related to his hustle at all. He owned a billiards hall in New York.
But then we also do get sort of the insight that Poppy himself wanted a better life for his daughter, because the fact that he sacrificed to send her to this private school, he was paying El Cero to stop his disgusting behavior. Well, with his daughters, it tells me that he knew, and it's sort of, I guess, the underbelly of the whole story, in that he knew that if he didn't do this, there was a likelihood that his daughter may become wayward, and he was like, I don't want that for her. Because here's Carlene. I assume Carlene is the same age or around the same age as Camino, and she's working in tourism and she's pregnant. And I'm assuming Poppy wouldn't want that for for his daughter at all.
Yeah, I think so. This lines up with. I think this is related to the topic at hand, but it's about choices or limited choices. Um, what Poppy was doing for his own child was trying to expand her choices. Again, he had his own dream about where he wanted Camino to land. Again, little play on the title of the book, but Camino does rehearse throughout the text about what she sees and the limited choices that people have in her neighborhood. Um, and so Poppy was trying to expand that and then get her out. Um, and it's so unfortunate. And then Tony mentioned El Cerro. Um, El Cerro was able to do what he does because of uh, the ties, the inequitable ties between the Dominican Republic and the United States. Because El Cerro is servicing, a light term for what he really does, but he's providing a service not for Dominicans, but for American tourists. And so it's this vicious cycle that goes on. And a girl like Camino could have easily fallen into that way because, but without Poppy being in the United States, her choices were so narrow.
Isn't there another level to it as well? Because it's the pain and grief of the loss of his beloved that pushes him even to make the choices that he then goes on to make, right? So it's extreme poverty that both hardens his heart, but also causes the death of a loved one. That means that his heart further hardens, and his loss of and the loss of human life that is dear to him means, and that's all related to the kind of, like you say, neo-colonial status of the relationship between the US and the Dominican Republic, right? It's another connection that they have.
So I think you need to clarify that the hymn you're speaking about is El Cerro, because I don't know that when you started speaking, yeah. I wasn't even sure that was a hymn.
Yeah. So yeah, the fact that El Cerro makes these kind of, because and what I really like about it is the intertwined nature of it, right? Again, El Cerro is not some random terrible person. He is the older brother of her former friend who is now passed on, right? And because of all of the things that meant that those things happened, he's become this kind of terrible villain character in the book. But it all stems from the same place of pain. That means that Camino also wants to escape, but his escapism just looks very different.
But then I also got the impression that El Cerro himself was very sleazy, because even though what's his name? Oh dear. Even though Poppy was paying El Cerro, as soon as the money dried up, he started hounding this girl and saying, well, you're not giving me any money, so you know what you have to give me in exchange. That's very sleazy, in my opinion.
I mean, that was his hustle. That's how he's making his money, like having the girls. So yeah, he's sleazy. There's no question in my mind that.
But I don't think and people in his line of work are anything but sleazy.
Right. Exactly.
But are there degrees of sleaziness?
Yeah, and going back to what Keswa was saying about his loss, it wasn't lost on me that both El Cerro and Camino lost a loved one at the same time and for the same reason. And there's all this, it's all intertwined. Yeah.
Well, I think El Cerro is a typical character that a lot of us know. They look behind the trees on the beach, and they look in the crevices of offices. I mean, they're just around, right? And the reason why I was maybe going with my imagination was that I thought maybe Pappy may have had a better choice of a protector than this sleazy man. But
He didn't choose him as a protector, though, Tony. He was paying him to leave his daughter alone. It's a totally different thing.
Well, I guess yes.
Protector in the sense of protection racket.
Yeah, from getting into that trap. That yeah, and well, what a blackmail then, Paula. I mean, I'm a villain. I'm got this character that sends me aggressively after young girls, and you, Paula, have to pay me to leave your daughter alone. That's a strange kind of a setup. Anyway.
Really? Kesawa said the word just now. It's a protection racket. Protection rackets are not unheard of. I don't know if it's because I come from a bigger island where we have more crime, but I don't find anything very unusual about a protection racket. I come from Kingston. People, I know lawyers. I've heard of lawyers. Let me not say I know. I've heard of lawyers who pay criminals because the legal district in Kingston is downtown, which is the crime district of Kingston. And I've heard of lawyers who pay criminals to not break into their places or to not steal their cars. And to keep the other criminals from breaking into their places and stealing their cars. So I don't find it shocking.
This sounds like the book that we're meant to be discussing next month, but as usual, we don't have enough time to discuss all the aspects of the book. But it was a lovely discussion, so I'll just briefly go around and to give a rating out of 10. Let's say 10. Kesuwa, you're first up.
I really love the novel. Definitely a 9.5.
Tony,
I'll give it a 9. I was wavering between 8.5 and 9, but to be honest, it's one of those things that creeps up on you. And when I listened to the reading by Lautier, I felt that deeper connection to the style and the format and all that, and then so it's a 9.
Paula.
Yes, it was an 8 for me. Well, we all know I'm the mean girl. It's lyrical. It's beautiful. I think perhaps I rated it 8 on not on my usual scale. It's an 8 on a young adult novel scale for me.
Francine.
So it's a definite 10 for me. I listened to the audiobook a year ago and loved it then. And I read it, the paper version, this time before this discussion, and loved it as well. And this book made me cry not just once, but several times, which doesn't happen very often. So for me, it's definitely a 10. I also recommend that if you are into audiobooks, you should definitely listen to the audio, which is narrated by the author as well as another narrator. Each sister has a different narrator, and it's just absolutely wonderful.
Eric.
Yeah, this is hard to rate it out of 10, but I'm gonna go with a 10 out of 10. The first time I read the book, as Francine just alluded to, it made me cry. I shed tears. It gripped me so much, and it's a powerful story. The second time I'm reading it, I gotten deeper meaning out of it, and some of the issues that we already talked about today, I was able to pull those things out. So the second reading was more meaningful to me in terms of the broader scope of the issues that Acevedo deals with. Very important issues for teenagers to engage in. So 10 out of 10.
Yep. And for me, I would rate it a 9 out of 10. And for me, it loses 1 point just because I found the ending too abrupt. Um, But other than that, it was a really lovely book. So that is our show. Thank you once again for tuning in. Next month, we'll be reviewing What a Mother's Love Don't Teach You by Sharma Taylor. It is her debut novel, which is also coming out in July. And so we're quite pleased to be reviewing it as soon as it comes out. Thank you once again for tuning in, and do have a lovely day.